Welcome back to the StoryMarc Worldbuilding Framework. This is part 2, where we dig into Tier 2, how to make your world feel lived in. But before we get into that, I need to make clear why this is Tier 2. I need to call out one of the biggest reasons world-building focused writers burn out before they even start their stories. Most people don't struggle with world-building because they're lazy. They struggle because they're trying to build the final product right out the gate. They look at something like One Piece, or Lord of the Rings, or Game of Thrones. They see a giant, fully formed world. Maps, languages, cultures, politics, a dozen religions, thousands of characters with complicated backstories. Blah, 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 blah. They assume that's what world-building is supposed to look like before you write a single word. They think about how the world building made them feel and how they want to recreate that feeling, and that's all they think about. That's not how those worlds were made. That's just how they ended up. What most people don't see is the process. The fact that Oda built the world of One Piece over decades, layering details as he went. That Tolkien rewrote his world again and again, reshaping history to fit the themes that emerge. That Sapkowski started with tight personal short stories and only expanded once he saw what worked. They didn't start with world building. They started with story. They started with struggle. They built just enough to get going. And they deepened it over time. But most writers today try to skip the process and jump straight to the polish. They bury themselves in lore before they have a story. They overwhelm themselves with details, trying to match the depth of their favorite authors, not realizing those authors didn't build their worlds that way either. That's how people quit. Not because they're not passionate, but because they're aiming at a masterpiece without the process to reach it. That's why this framework exists. Because world building doesn't need to be this impossible, overwhelming task. And to be frank, I am tired of all those online who have made this harder than it needs to be. I'm still refining my methodology for all of this, but I can say this with absolute confidence. World building can be structured. It can be prioritized. That's why we have tiers. Tier 1 is the core engine, conflict that defines the story, the factions that enforce it, the immediate world where it all plays out. Those 3 are all you need to start. You could build nothing else and still write a great story, because Tier 1 makes sure your world serves the protagonist's struggle, not just your imagination. But still, that's the foundation. If Tier 1 is about making your world function, then Tier 2 is about making your world feel real. It's where we stop asking, what must exist for the story to work, and start asking, what makes this world feel lived in? We're talking about the daily lives of the people inside the world, the key locations that shape the journey, and the systems of power, technology, magic, whatever it is, that govern how things work. None of it exists for its own sake. It exists to support tension, texture, and immersion. So in this video, we're diving into Tier 2, the layer that turns this world from functional to immersive. Let's get into it. Step 1, daily life and survival. This is where you stop building the world from the outside in and start building from the inside out. Through people. Through the things they do every day. Through the way they survive, get by, or fall through the cracks. What does a regular person wake up thinking about? What's their routine? What do they fear, chase, or just accept because that's the way things are? And for your protagonist, what parts of the world feel normal? And what parts grate against them every day? This step matters because it builds immersion without exposition. Instead of dumping lore on the reader, you're showing them the world through the lens of experience. You're grounding the reader in the lived reality of the protagonist and the people around them. It also gives a natural contrast. If your protagonist is a noble living in luxury while others scrape by, show us what that looks like. If they're a smuggler, show us the rules they break and the ones who they can't afford to. This contrast is what makes stakes feel real. It lets readers see what the world tolerates, what it crushes, and who gets away with that. And most importantly, it reinforces the story's conflict by showing us how the world normalizes it. Because the most dangerous part of any world isn't the tyrant or the monster or the storm. It's the fact that people just keep living with it. So ask yourself, how do people survive in this world? What does everyday life look like for different groups of people? What does the protagonist accept as normal? And what do they quietly or loudly resist? How do social classes, resources, or geography shape someone's daily experience? What parts of their daily life make the protagonist's struggle feel inescapable? This step doesn't require big systems or perfect answers. You're not designing a full economy or government policy. You're asking, how do people live here? And what does that say about the world your story takes place in? Because when readers feel like they understand how people live, they start to believe the world is real, even if they've only seen one street. Step 5. Key locations and set pieces. Now that your world feels lived in, it's time to zoom in. Step 5 is all about the key locations where your story actually changes. Not the background noise, not the general atmosphere. I'm talking about the places where things happen that can't be undone. And let's be clear, this is not the same as Step 3. Step 3 was about the immediate world, the everyday environment that surrounds your protagonist and reinforces the story's core conflict. It's the pressure system, the cage. Step 5 is about narrative movement. These are all the specific places your character enters where choices are made, secrets are revealed, power is won or lost. These are your story's pressure points, the rooms, buildings, cities, or landscapes that get burned into the reader's memory because something happened there that matters. So no, you don't need to build a full globe. You don't need to name every city on every continent. You need to know where the story moves forward, where conflict escalates, where characters are tested. These are the locations that frame your scenes and structure your plot. Think about the throne room where a final confrontation unfolds, the courtroom where a betrayal comes to light, the back alley where an informant spills the wrong secret, the underground market where forbidden tech changes hands, or, even more intimate, the apartment your protagonist keeps coming back to, the diner where every major argument breaks out, the hallway where the final choice is made and no one speaks. Big or small, grand or mundane, it doesn't matter. What matters is the story weight behind it. These are not just locations, they are emotional triggers. They shape the reader's memory of your world through the scenes that happen inside them. That's why you don't create locations like you're writing a travel brochure. You're not here to show off scenic design. You're building stages, and every stage should serve tension, power dynamics, or irreversible change. So ask yourself, what specific location shapes the story's major turning points? Which places reinforces the protagonist's conflict or worldview? What makes these locations dangerous, sacred, restricted, or emotionally loaded? Who controls access to these places and who's locked out? How do these locations change characters, force decisions, or expose truths? What would feel off if a certain event happened anywhere else? And don't overdo it. The goal isn't volume, it's precision. Build just enough to give each major moment a setting that amplifies what's happening. Make each location count. Because readers don't remember places that were described beautifully. They remember places where something unforgettable happened. Step 6. Technology, magic, and supernatural systems. We've talked about the people, the places, how your world feels lived in. Now it's time to talk about power. How do people in your world get things done? How do they push, defend, escape, break the rules, or enforce them? That's what step 6 is all about. And let's get this out of the way. This step isn't about how clever your system is. This is not the time to show off how many elemental energies you've named or how many rules your power system has. It's about how power functions in your world, and more importantly, how it complicates the story's conflict. I'll talk about those other things another time. Regardless, power systems, whether they're magic, tech, divine intervention, or anything else, are only meaningful when they create tension. If your system solves more problems than it causes, your story has no teeth. Here's the real purpose of this step: to figure out how your protagonist is limited and how power is controlled in your world. Who gets access to it? Who's cut off from it? What does it cost to use? What happens when someone pushes it too far? In other words, this is about restrictions, not possibilities. Because power without limits breaks tension. A magic system where everyone can do everything leads to a story where nothing feels earned. A world with hyper advanced tech but no consequences turns into plot armor. That's why your world building needs to treat power systems like political systems. Someone controls it. Someone abuses it. Someone builds their identity around it. And someone is punished for stepping out of line. So, the real question isn't, what's the coolest power in your world? It's, how does access to power shape the protagonist's journey? Think about it. If your story is about rising through a broken system, power needs to feel locked away or monopolized. If your story is about resisting corruption, power needs to come at a moral cost. If your story is about self-mastery, power should be unstable, something the protagonists must learn to handle. And you don't have to over-explain it. You don't need a full textbook of rules and sub-rules. Just enough clarity to show the protagonist in your world, just enough clarity to show that power in your world has stakes. That it shapes the struggle, not shortcuts it. So ask yourself, what kind of power exists in this world? Technological, magical, supernatural, or otherwise? What does it allow people to do, and what can't it do? Who has access to it? Who doesn't? What's the cost, consequence, or risk of using it? How does this system complicate the protagonist's core conflict? How does the world control or regulate this power? Through laws, taboos, social systems, or violence? Power systems aren't about flash. They're about pressure. They make the world harder, messier, or more dangerous to navigate. What makes the protagonist's choices and the story matter more. And we'll get back around to all those who wish to go deeper into magic systems, as I have a lot of thoughts on that and alternate explanation for this system for those who want to start at magic systems. That's a future video. In the meantime, let's get ready for part 3. We're 6 steps into my 11-step method, with the remaining 4 being optional and context dependent. Next up, we're going to go into how to expand into history, religion, warfare, and so forth. These are the things that make your world feel big, but only work when built in response to the story, not just for the sake of lore. So, look forward to that and more next.